Hi, my name is Tim Carter. I pastor Landmark Missionary Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Arkansas, and this is their outreach program ministry. I don't know, it's a website, and on it we have a YouTube channel, and we give answers. It began by giving answers in a Wednesday night series on apologetics, and then we joined it with a program of years ago, Fishers of Men, and so we combined apologetics and outreach because from my view, reaching people was always the ability to help them overcome an occasion of stumble where they would trip or something, or they would be mixed up or confused about things. Well, of course, several years ago, rapture hysteria was going on, and it was great. The rationale for the pre-trib was now sensationalized. It went to Hollywood. This famous novel, which the owner of this one never read it because the book spine is not creased, and those of us who have actually read books know that you'll really need to open it. But this is called The Left Behind. Now, the novelist, Mr. Jenkins, is not to be confused with the theologist, Tim LaHaye. And he combined to write all these things, and of course it's stacked up into quite a series. I didn't buy them then because I always knew that given enough time I could find them in a garage sale, and these are actually in a thrift sale right now as we speak. I'll be returning them shortly because I wouldn't give the $1 or 50 cents per each one. Not that they're not a great read for someone who has time for fantasy literature, fiction novels. But what's striking is I still am amazed that I was trying to teach the book of Revelation years ago, long ago as 1989. And in this class, people kept asking me something I had not yet been prepared for, that is prepared for their need. And they would say, but where do you put the rapture? And I made the mistake of saying, well, where do you need it? And then I began to see something I'd never heard of before. A person angered or emotionally disappointed because it was of no consequence to me. So now it still happens, and I tell people, oh, your solution may be pre-trib raptureism, where you don't even discuss the return of Christ, the resurrection of the dead, the fact that then the living ones, the ones who we ourselves, the living ones, we who are remaining around, will be simultaneously seized away together. You may never even care that the return, the raising of the dead, and the seizing away all occurs simultaneously as a concurrent event. But all I was trying to do in the class was add to their knowledge what the Bible actually says. But I learned it's very, for example, here's just an English Bible, and you could see it. If I set it over here, you could hardly keep it in the view. There's just not a lot of material when you come to the Bible, and Christ really did a lot to assure that we didn't have to concern ourselves with those days. He said he would cut those days short, lest all flesh should be destroyed. And then he went on to say, but for the elect's sake, those days would be cut short. So the rationale for that, which, you have a lot of people go the wrong direction, and they'll start talking about the nation of Israel. I think they're referring to the unbelieving Jewish nation. Really, I don't know what they're talking about because that concept doesn't exist anywhere in the Bible. Ishmaelites were not of the promise. That is, they were the children of God because through them the seed would come, but that didn't mean they were in Christ. And being in Abraham is not equal to being in Christ. And we are children of Abraham by faith in Christ. He calls the churches in the region of Galatia the Israel of God. But then people begin to retort and say something about replacement theology because their minds can't see from a point of view from which the contradiction disappears. Thus, in Matthew 24:22, it says, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. So first of all, the days are cut off to prevent all people from being killed. If you look in Revelation 13, you'll see a real nasty person there, especially, and that's easy to remember if you know how unlucky and bad the number 13 is thought of. And it says, all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of life. And it goes on and talks about that, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And it sounds terrible. And it says that he had to makes the small, the great, the rich, the poor, all people to come and worship him. Well, it looks to me like that people who suppose you have to cut off the rapture from the resurrection and disconnect it from the return of Christ is because it's the only way they can understand getting out of here, because in Revelation 13, in a normal reading, looks like everyone will be killed. And Jesus had already addressed that concern in Matthew 24:22 by saying, except those days should be cut off or cut short, shortened, there should no flesh be saved. Then it says, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be cut short. Now, interesting that Jesus said this, because the days that would put everyone's lives at risk, he said, will be cut short to prevent that from ever happening. So when you're reading Revelation, you say, oh no, here it is. Everyone will be killed. Well, Jesus said those are the days that he would cut short so that everyone wouldn't be killed. And then he went on to explain to his students that for the elect's sake, that is who they were, elect plural there, the elect one's sake, he would do that. But interesting, because in the Old Testament, when the deliverer Moses was to be born, the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, was so upset that he killed all the children, the innocent children. And then in Matthew, the beginning of the gospel of this book, we saw that Rachel was weeping in Ramah, for her children were not, and that was speaking of the place where the Israelites were taken captive and were about to be deported into captivity. And it went all the way back to the slaughter of the children in Egypt. It went back to the deportation of the children of Israel into captivity. And then the Gospel of Matthew opens up with the elect one, Jesus, singular, as Isaiah mentions. He's being pursued by King Herod. He kills everyone 2 and under. Well, the depiction here is that the invader, the ruler of this powerful force, as depicted in Revelation, and people call the Antichrist and false prophet, which are 2 different characters in the Bible. But to kill the elect ones, plural, he begins to kill everyone. And a religious leader years ago, under some type of inquisition, when it was becoming a concern for the military who were carrying out the orders of execution, they said, well, how do we sort them out? And this religious leader is famous for having said, kill them all, God knows his own. Now you can look all that up, but the rationale for why he would mention all flesh is because the irrationale of persecution is to slaughter everyone. Thus, we have 2 cases in the Bible. The birth of Moses, the king of Egypt, killed all the baby boys that were born. Then in the beginning of the gospel, when Jesus was born, King Herod had all the boys killed 2 and under. Now, how he knew to do that was because the religious leaders, the people who killed Jesus, the Pharisees and Sadducees, like all religions, hate Jesus. They were professional for hire religious professionals. They met with Herod. He knew to call them in, for he knew they would betray their own Messiah. They'd already done so. He had already hired them. And they told him where he'd be born. They told him plus or minus a year, give or take. This is how accurate they were of knowledge of the Old Testament prophecies of the coming of the Messiah, that they could actually be consulted. How unscrupulous they were, that Herod could count on them to help him slaughter the innocents. Well, again, now the rationale for persecution, because God's elect ones are all over the world, and as anyone who studied persecution, it's escalated from the time that God's people, his elect ones, had to flee from the city of Jerusalem because the Judaizers, who were Pharisees, Sadducees, had begun to wage war with the Romans that they had collaborated with and gone in league with to kill Jesus. Now, as Jesus said, the house divided is falling, the pressure's collapsing in, and Jesus said, when you see these armies battle array the city, you flee, don't even stop and get your clothes. So from that point forward, we see the rational basis for understanding martyrdom. Now, why it's disappointing to people who find that, well, there's no dilemma there. Well, of course there's no dilemma in the Bible. There's no contradiction. And Jesus, of course, has already said that he would cut those days short, the days that would result in everyone being killed. And then he said again, so it's parallelism. On one hand, it's to prevent all people from being slaughtered, which is very irrational, unless we remember King of Egypt and Herod the king both set historical precedents of unimaginable horror to go out and slaughter every born child, son, to assure that the elect singular, the chosen one, Moses chosen to deliver the Hebrews, Jesus, the Messiah, to come and deliver his people, to be the king of the Jews. So it's very much in line with what the Bible said. And it makes a lot of sense when Jesus says those days will be cut short. So when I presented the no problem to the class, and I still present it in the pulpit, always letting people know, now if you've got all this. We've got all the glamour, the Hollywood, the sensationalism, the fiction writings. Even Tim LaHaye, before he passed away last year, said that Christ wouldn't return in his lifetime, which contradicts the very nature of the sensationalism that people generated around the imminent return and all those things. But when they said imminent return, they didn't mean Jesus' return. They meant the secret escape, which escape from what? For the days that would require us to be gone to survive, because it seems so global and so widespread. Well, Jesus said, except those days should be cut short. Well, everyone would have been killed. And he said, but for the elect's sake, those days will be cut short, which that's the rationale for understanding why the slaughter. Well, persecutors know, as one said in history, just kill everyone and those known by God will be received into heaven, of course. So it was disappointing to the class because I think they thought it was, complicated, and I'd have to come up with some kind of, well, how are you going to explain Revelation, the apocalyptic narrative literature, and what about this gospel account, and how do you take Matthew 24 and figure out which is referring to this and to that? Well, being very astute in the science of hermeneutics, I realize that the Bible will never, Jesus will never be famous like this, and that's why I wouldn't preach against it. What's wrong with people having a solution to a problem? Except it's just the problem doesn't exist in the Bible. So no pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, none of those are necessary, because first, none are possible, because the event of seizing away those of us who are living, the living ones, that is, those of us who are remaining around, the purpose of seizing us away, that occurs simultaneously with raising the dead away. And then, of course, when Christ has every one of his own with him, he continues into finalizing his return. And, of course, because it's too difficult for people to, a lot of people teach two covenant communities. The Bible does not. The New Testament churches are his covenant community, and the New Testament churches are composed of Jew and Gentile. When Paul said, as God cast away his people, well, of course not. Paul was there. The first church in the New Testament were baptized Jews, Jewish ones who had believed, and because they believed, the gospel was the power of God unto their deliverance. So anyway, it was just interesting, because I was always amazed that I was very happy to leave what people had appropriated for themselves alone. Why I wouldn't even know why to negate these things. It's kind of nice to know that a Baptist like Tim LaHaye, somebody made it, and wrote a big book and a lot of sensational things. It's just, Jesus is a Baptist. He baptized his church on the day of Pentecost with Spirit, and his story is important, more important. But I find that people that appropriate this type of stuff then don't want the simple thing that the Bible said. But it's a very big deal that Jesus will shut down, cut short those days. It's huge. When I ask people, why do you talk about the rapture when the Bible talks about the cutoff or the cutting short? And they don't know what to say. They say, so they've never heard of it. And truthfully, they haven't. So now you have, and for those of you that ask me all the time, often all the time, it's starting to be less and less people now are asking because they're listening now. They can go to the website, they can read the articles, they can read the Bible for themselves. And if they put it all in context, kings persecuted and killed everyone to get to one singular. That is, all the boys, babies to get to one Moses, then killed all the boy babies to get to one Jesus. Now Jesus is stepping in as the one who knew what it was like to be pursued, and he cuts off this maniacal beast and Antichrist and all that nonsense that we read about in the book of Revelation. Someone said, well, why is it written in there? So we'll know what he stops. God stops it. It's like asking, why is Goliath in the story of David and Goliath? Because Goliath kills him. I don't understand the conflict, but it's really great news that in all of that, Jesus wins, shuts those days off, and everyone's not killed. And it's because of the elect's sake that Jesus saved all those other people's lives. And think about it. When we realize why God chose us, which is the same for everyone who has believed the gospel, who's come out from among all that Christ's blood's redeemed us, that is, it might be a different function or a different place, like someone may be in a church in Rome, someone like me may be in a church in Jacksonville, someone might be a deacon in a church, someone may be a pastor like myself in a church, but we're all here to establish the same kind of harmonious arrangement that's only known in the New Testament churches. And that's why we have such a great desire and are happy to teach people the gospel, the correct message, baptize them biblically so they can sever their ties, come out from among that from which the blood of Christ purchased them, teach them what it is to fellowship, commune into the gospel, and having agreed together, covenanted together to observe the teachings, we now have the highest regard for husband, head of a household, head of a wife. We recognize God as the head of Jesus, Jesus head of the husband, husband head of the wife, children obey the parents. And that's not a problem for us to respect that, regard that, promote that, and encourage it. And then as brothers in a covenant, heads of our households, we work together to carry out the Great Commission, make disciples. Well, when this global expansion of persecution, as people predict, will one day again be under one person's rule, and he'll take all these wonderful global things like even our global worldwide internet and use it to persecute, as people forecast and continue to predict, it won't matter, because when it becomes the height of those pressure of those days, even the word after the tribulation of those days in English, the word after is in midst of or in partner, in association with. It's the same word as the Great Commission when Jesus says, I will be with you all, in partnership with you all, until the end of the age, the consummation age. Well, Jesus will cut that off. So by the time we think it looks like everyone will be killed, and all the horrible things we hear about that call for people to then produce solutions, which is an admirable thing, produce solutions. It's just Jesus is the answer. And Jesus already said he would cut it off according to the same rationale that we already seen before, so that all flesh would not be destroyed. And then he said, because of the elect's sake, that is, those are chosen and spoken out, and those are Gentiles and Jews. That elect there is plural, and the elect ones, Jews and Gentiles, that the world hates, and that this global conflict is predicted by so many to escalate. It wouldn't matter how big it becomes, wouldn't matter how large the adversary is, wouldn't matter how powerful. Jesus will still cut it off, and the days that we're always hearing about will never take place. And that's good news. And again, this is only for people who wanted to know before these solutions were generated and produced, and before all this sensationalism occurred, what did the Bible say before all that, and what will actually take place? Will it be cut off? So You have a blessed day. Get on with your life. Remain occupied until the Lord comes, not preoccupied with trying to figure out all these things. This is recreational, enjoyable. It's in the fiction section. Keep it in perspective and go serve your King. Have a blessed day.